Our keynote speaker this year is the Reverend Dr. Frank Thomas. Reverend Dr. Thomas, Frank, is a person who has really quite a stellar academic credentials. You'll see that he is taught preaching at two different seminaries in Memphis and also in the Chicago area, McCormick in the Chicago area. And now he's teaching full-time at Christian Theological Seminary in Indianapolis, Indiana. But he's also a pastor. And I say that, as I said about myself a little while ago, just in having dinner last night, my wife and I with Frank Thomas, we share a very strong love for the church and for preaching. And we even refer to being in the trenches of ministry in some literal ways at times, because there's times that it's difficult and there's times where it's absolutely wonderful. And through it all, through the years of ministry, it informs the way in which the gospel is lived out within that community. And he served two churches in the Memphis, Tennessee area, and you'll see that that coincided with his preaching or teaching preaching in both those seminaries, both in Memphis and in the Chicago area. We are very, very pleased to have him here today. And also you'll notice that the workshops are listed in here as well if you signed up for those. And pardon me for the little advertisement here. Frank has written a number of books. We have two of them available at the Sacred Page bookstore, which is, if you're not familiar, it's over by the atrium as you go down the hallway to the right, to my right. And the two that are available, this is the one many of us have read, and it's Frank A. Thomas, They Like to Never Quit Praising God. And you're encouraged. It's a great book to read. I've not read this one yet. The Introduction to the Practice of African American Preaching is another book that he has. And it is our great privilege to welcome Frank here this morning. Let's give him a welcome.
I certainly want to thank Steve for that very kind introduction, particularly the holding up the book part. That was just wonderful. Thank you so much. I got a jolt of encouragement right there. Thank you so much. To President Tim, to Shauna, and all the hospitality that I have received, I'm thankful and grateful to be with you all. It's an honor, a challenge one day before this very critical election. Very serious challenge, but we're going to try to get through it, and I appreciate yesterday, Pastor John, I was at Pillar, had a wonderful time. Last night I preached a gathering, so I want you to know I'm all preached out even before I got to yesterday, took it out of me. So, play my tapes from yesterday. You say, he was really good yesterday. So let me get to this because time is important, and I am grateful to come. I have realized that there are many people that could be chosen to do this, and so I have plenty of friends in the audience, and I'm thankful. I must confess to you that as I was working on these lectures, my original title, Preaching a Celebrative Gospel in an Uncelebrative Age, and Preaching the Wisdom of the Ages in a Soundbite in a Celebrity Culture, completely underwhelmed me when I began to write. Completely underwhelmed me. Shauna did a wonderful job, sent ahead of time. What titles? What are you going to talk about? I was fired up when I sent it. And yet, as our national conversation that we know as the presidential election has emerged, I have been in times of tremendous anxiety, stress, repulsion, anger, and also found a very creative opportunity for prayer and trusting God. As a matter of fact, I was deeply wounded by what I've heard and what I've seen and the support for what I believe is just unhealthy leadership in so many ways. And only in my deep devotional and my deep prayer life am I able to stand in front of you and be sane, because it's deeply, I'm deeply concerned what will happen in the aftermath of our election cycle, regardless of who wins. These realities have shifted my thinking, and so I have written what's in my heart. I do want you to know that Shauna did absolutely everything right and in order, timely, exactly as she should, so this change is not on her. All this is on me. So let me tell you what I want to do for the whole day quickly. Plenary session 1 will be called Preaching to Build Spiritual Community, the Importance of Moral Imagination and the Common Good. Sorry about the title change, but the other stuff just completely underwhelmed me. The importance of it's called Preaching to Build Spiritual Community, the Importance of Moral Imagination and the Common Good. At the end of the lecture, I'm going to give some pointers, some criteria. Then I'm going to preach a chapel sermon that you can apply the criteria that I just said to the sermon, to discern if in fact the sermon does any of what I'm saying will do to build spiritual community, moral imagination, and the common good. At 12, I'm hoping to discuss with students the sermon and the building spiritual community through moral imagination and the common good. And then finally, I'm going to close with a lecture at 1. It's called When Only a Few Lives Matter, Preaching, Race, and Moral Imagination. That's the one that's going to get me in hot water, but I want you to be here for it. So at least when I sneak out of here, you can say, I heard it myself. You know, you don't have to. So let me begin. I want to start with this. In a book called Singing the Lord's Song in a Strange Land, the Reverend Dr. Joseph E. Lowry published a sermon entitled Chaplains for the Common Good. In 1998, after his retirement from SCLC, Lowry joined with other activists and formed the Coalition for the People's Agenda. This was a coalition of advocacy groups on civil rights, peace, labor, women's issues, justice, youth, human rights, etc. At the end of each and every meeting, they would together quote this line: "We are chaplains of the common good." He said that they meant while many see the role of a chaplain as reading scriptures and praying prayers at hospitals, community, civic, governmental, religious, social, and even organizational meetings before they eat or discuss business, they saw the role much deeper than that. A chaplain is the conscience of an organization, the conscience of a nation, the conscience of a school, the conscience of a church, urging all to do what is right and what is pleasing to God. He said that chaplains nudge to the common good. He said through scriptures and prayers and sometimes a clap of thunder, they jar us to a righteous reality. Sometimes it is a flash of lightning making plain the landscape of societal ills. Sometimes it is a whisper into our still conscience. Sometimes it's an alarm clock saying it's time to rise. Sometimes it's a bugle call to engagement. Sometimes it's a cool breeze of thankfulness following the glory of triumph or the agony of defeat. But it is always on the side of the Creator, always calling out the best in us, calling out the common good. We are chaplains of the common good. We are chaplains for the hurts and the concerns and the needs. We are the conscience of this nation, this community. We are the conscience of our political leaders. And in this critical hour of American and global life, we so desperately need chaplains of the common good. I want to suggest that we have lost the sense of the common good in this nation. In one of my recent books called American Dream 2.0, A Christian Way Out of the Great Recession, I asked this question in this book: what is the centrality that holds this nation together? What is the common vision that unifies us? What is the common mission of America that we all share, such to the extent that we would all be willing to sacrifice personal interests to see the vision become a reality? What is the dream of America? There is no divine category called America, and God didn't just drop it out of the sky and set it in the garden. America is a socially constructed concept and identity based upon the adoption and the agreement of certain values and principles. What are the values and the principles that we share such that we might call our agreement the common good? What would we we be willing to sacrifice in our personal interest to see the common good? We are chaplains of the common good. What we have become is a nation of special interest, and each special interest is more concerned about their special interest than the interest of the common good. We have become a nation of self-preserving special interests whose mantra is, don't touch mine. When we get through with the shenanigans, the distractions, the smoke screens, the blaming, the insults, what we do, what we mean is don't touch my benefits and don't touch my interest. Don't touch my guns. Don't touch my Medicare and Social Security. Don't touch my defense spending. Don't touch the military and prison industrial complex. Don't touch my corporate welfare. Don't touch my mortgage interest deduction. Don't touch my grants. Don't touch my farm subsidy. Don't touch my tax breaks. Don't touch my Section 8. Do not touch my entitlements. As a result, we do not remotely touch the concept of the common good. We have even lost the concept of sacrifice in this nation. When was the last time you heard anybody call this nation to sacrifice? We haven't been asked to give up anything. And I remember during the Great Recession, of course, when all that was going on, we were asked to go and shop. It's almost reminiscent or nostalgic for World War II, when the cause was great enough for this nation to jointly sacrifice. Now we just send a few soldiers, and the military families suffer the great brunt while the rest of us get to shop and to dance and to party, and then we wrap a few ribbons around trees, and our leaders act like idiots, while soldiers and their families have their lives on the line every day. We've lost the common good. You can't sacrifice if there's no common vision. America is about our rights and what we can get and what we can protect, and as a result, don't touch mine. We live in America of my benefit, our benefit. As long as we exclusively focus on our benefit or the benefits of our group, we can't see the common good. We have lost the American dream. We, though, are chaplains of the common good. I believe there are specific factors that pressure the common good, and our response to those factors, if we're not careful, lead us to focus on our own special interests, which fractures the common good. I'd like to list some of those factors. First, we live in a less U.S.-centric, knowledge-driven, and more competitive world. India and China are rising as financial powers, and it is projected by the year 2020, if not sooner, that China will be the world's largest economy. Several nations are now outpacing America in education, science, engineering, and skill development, not to mention the availability of a cheap labor pool with fewer benefit responsibilities, which is attractive to global capital. The bottom line is a hard truth that no politician will tell the American people. The old middle-class jobs in America can be done much more cheaply elsewhere, and as a result, may not be coming back. Many of these jobs that made middle class in America are gone forever, and if they come back, the wages will be lower with fewer benefits. Wages will be lower with fewer benefits for a long time to come, but no politician will tell you that. They won't stand up and tell the people the truth about that. They blame other people. It's the immigrants. It's the blacks. It's this. It's that. They will not tell the people the truth, and the truth is that these jobs are not coming back, so what we need is a massive jobs training program to train our people so that they're ready for the 21st century, and what we're doing is offering 20th century solutions, trickle-down economics, and big government to 21st century problems, and so what we need is a moral imagination. What we need is creativity. This leads to the second factor. While middle-class income benefits and jobs are shrinking, the exaggerated view of capitalistic economic striving that has come to shape America has come to define the person as a consumer. We are fundamentally defined as consumers. That's a theological problem because we said we were made in the image of God, and I know that the image of God means consume. I don't know that that's what God intended, that we would be defined as consumers. So consumerism is the image of God in which we were conceived according to American capitalistic culture. We consume first, and even if we were to go by capitalistic standards, many of us never own very much. One of my favorite authors, Thomas Piketty, says that wealth is so concentrated at the top that a large segment of society is virtually unaware of its existence. You heard that Chris Rock joke? That if poor people ever saw how rich people live, they'd riot? And he gave the example of the lounge, the first-class lounge at Virgin Atlantic. If poor people had a chance to come up here and see all this stuff that's available, did you hear that joke? The very size of inherited fortunes is so great that it makes them practically invisible. He says we're never going to meet these people, and they're never going to have a sense of what they are able to control. By and large, we're consumers of the common good. This leads to my third factor. The widening and increasing gap between the rich and the poor during reality is that 1% of America had access to the American dream from the 1980s to the first decade and one half in the 21st century. Especially since the Great Recession, a lot has been done analyzing wealth inequality. I read something, a 211 briefing paper, The State of Working America's Wealth. Listen to this. In 2009, 40% of black households had zero or negative net worth. That means line up any 10 black people you want to find, and 4 of them have zero or negative net worth. Unless you go to some exclusive place. But just take random sampling, line up 10 black people. 4 of them have zero or negative. The median net worth of black households was $2,200 in 2009. The lowest ever recorded, the median income among white households is $97,900. The level of inequality is the highest, probably higher than any other society at any time in the past and anywhere in the world. Over 3 decades, between 1977 and 2007, 60% of our national income went to the richest 1% of Americans. The needs and concerns of the poor are not even on the American agenda, other than private help from churches and foundations and things. It's middle class, it's middle class. What does this mean for those of us who are chaplains of the common good, especially when so many of our people are poor? White poor, black poor. I'll say more about that later this afternoon. This leads to our fourth factor, and maybe the overarching factor of them all, which is the chief argument of my book, American Dream 2.0, is America was intended as a ritual of benefit for a certain group or class of European people, particularly white, Anglo-Saxon, European Protestant people. Though this ritual of benefit has been included at several times to include other Europeans, for the most part, the ritual benefit of America has been reserved for a few. Though the ideal of the rhetoric was liberty and justice for all, it really hadn't been intended for all. I can't go in depths of detail yet just now. I'll talk some more about this afternoon if y'all don't run me out of here before then. But America was conceived as a ritual of consensus of those of European middle-class values and culture and excluded Native Americans, free blacks, slaves, Jews, immigrants, women, and so on. And for the most part, still does. And recently, many white Americans are waking up to the fact that they're not included in the ritual benefit of America either. Later, I'll talk about this concept of whiteness as a very narrow group of people that have access to the benefits and the resources of America. And some white people are finding out that they're not included in whiteness either. And they're upset. Yes, a ritual of benefit, that. My meaning is that the benefit and the privileges of America were reserved to a certain class of people and not intended for everybody. So this then is the breakdown in the common good, in the vision of America, in the And so what I want to do now is go down to a neighborhood breakdown. In other words, when things break down at the top, these breakdowns get expressed this next section I'm calling Meet the Parents. Upon the recommendation of a friend, I read Jay-Z's book, Decoded. It is the best piece of exegesis that I've read in the last 20 years. Jay-Z defined the purpose of his music from his first to his latest album as a desire to articulate the interior space of a young kid's head, their psychology. He means that a kid does not wake up one day and say, I think I'll sell drugs today. It is hard for many of us to see the inner motivation of a young kid selling drugs, hustling, but there's a context, a specific motivation, and an inner psychology, and some purposeful action, even if we don't agree with the moral choice of selling drugs and the like. He suggests that to negatively identify or demonize and stereotype a kid that sells drugs or a kid that has a gun and not clarify why the kid sells the drugs or has the gun in the first place is to tell a kind of lie. It is not the full story. He says, well, let me shorten it, so I want to make sure that I fit. Let me get it. He says that hustling is the ultimate metaphor for the basic human struggle. He said the struggle to survive and resist, the struggle to win and make sense of it all is what's wrapped up in hip hop. He says, this is why hip-hop is the lingua franca of young generations all over the world. This is what he said. This is why the hustler story through hip-hop has connected with the global audience. The deeper we get into those sidewalk cracks, into the mind of the young hustler trying to find his fortune there, the closer we get to the ultimate human story, the story of struggle, which is that which defines us all. The dominant cultural logic of hip-hop is the real. In an attempt to keep it real, Jay-Z performed a song entitled Meet the Parents. Let me describe that to you quickly and briefly. Jay-Z starts the song with a send-off, the burial and afterlife of a young hustler who was shot and killed. After he describes the rain-gray skies at the cemetery and the forlorn cries of such a good kid, he gives the audience the sense that the young man was honorable and well-respected by his peers. He then shifts the narrative to talk about the single mother of the deceased, Isis, who is not strong enough to raise a boy by herself, as many women are not, Jay-Z suggests and later amends, given the reality of the streets. The father's name was Shorty, who never knew the boy and never tried to raise him. After the death of her son and seeing his body at the city morgue, Isis turns to drugs. Her addiction grew and grew until she lived in a land of drug-based fantasy. Jay-Z fully develops the character of Isis by suggesting that she, like so many young ladies in the ghetto, falls for the aggressive, violent, and exciting Shorty at 16, but soon discover that what is appealing at 16 is not necessarily attractive when the thug becomes a grown man. He identifies now the absent father, Shorty, gives him a name called Mike. Mike has a son that is now 15. Remember the one he wasn't going to raise with ISIS. This son is now 15, and Jay-Z reminds us that Mike disowned the boy from birth. Mike is still on the street, and he approaches this young thug. Both of them end up drawing .38 caliber guns. The younger is faster and has the drop on Mike. But the young son hesitates because the face looks familiar. Jay-Z adds in his exegetical commentary about the lyrics, you get the sense that he studied every face he's seen, looking for the face of his father. And now he sees it, and it freezes him. He hesitates, and the father does not, and kills his son. The song ends, 6 shots into his kin out of the gun. Niggas, be a father. You're killing your son. 6 shots into his kin out of the gun. Niggas, be a father. You're killing your sons. Meet the parents. Jay-Z suggests that ISIS, well, let me say this. Notice the careful attention to character development. ISIS, the death of her son, led to her addiction. Her love of thugs at 16 flowers into the deepest pain of her life 15 years later. Second, Shorty Mike is the absentee father that never grows up and is still running the streets 15 years after the birth of his son. And third, the young son on the street, hard, perpetrating intergenerational schism by not feeling he has to pay respect to the older generation, yet human enough to still be looking for his father's face. Jay-Z brings the entire narrative to resolution in the meeting of the father and the son face to face and gun to gun. The father kills his own son. He closes with the admonition to be fathers, because fathers that abandon their children are killing their sons. When he closes with the line, meet the parents, he means that it is impossible to understand the hip-hop generation without understanding their parents. I do not think he just means their immediate parents. I think he means the breakdown of parents at the national level. He's talking about parents that don't have a sense of the common good, that neglect these neighborhoods. He's talking about the parents that are so concerned with their own special interests, of their own small town, of their own suburban area. They're not concerned that the ritual benefit of America is restricted to a few. Meet the parents, we the parents. So our tendency is to disconnect ourselves. I may say a little bit more this afternoon, to disconnect ourselves from this reality that Jay-Z is defining. I read a piece that said all the killings, talking about Chicago is killing. I'll talk some of that this afternoon. Don't talk a lot this afternoon, but you know. But those killings happen in 4 neighborhoods. 4 neighborhoods. All the killing is done in 4. There are neighborhoods in Chicago that never have seen a homicide, never had a sense of a homicide. 4 neighborhoods. Meet the parents. We don't have a sense of the common good at the top. Because we don't have a sense of the common good at the top, it's no wonder that in certain neighborhoods, lest I leave you in all this bad news, we are chaplains of the common good. Chaplains of the common good overcome the breakdown of spiritual community. We overcome the breakdown of spiritual community with moral imagination. In our preaching, we offer moral imagination, a vision of the common good. I'll spend a little bit more time this afternoon defining moral imagination, but in the interest of time, let me quote Russell Kirk, who popularized Edmund Burke's term moral imagination. Kirk suggests that the moral imagination aspires to the apprehending of right order in the soul and right order in the commonwealth. It takes moral imagination. It aspires to the apprehending of right order in the soul and right order in the commonwealth. Right order in the soul and right order in the commonwealth is the common good. Let me talk about in preaching, first of all, first, it takes moral imagination and a sense of the common good to go to Jay-Z's neighborhood that he's defining. It takes moral imagination to go to some of these neighborhoods and talk to people and try to understand. We're good at pontificating about people and we've never been to their neighborhood, trying to understand things from their perspectives. We say who people are are and what they need, and we judge them without ever talking to them. We're operating off of stereotypes and myths and perceptions. We offer solutions and commentary and prescriptions and never even been to the neighborhood, never even talked to anybody in the neighborhood. It takes moral imagination to see people and offer, no matter the divisions and the breakdown, a vision of justice, love, and peace and mercy, and I'm showing up to make it happen. You can't do that if you don't come to the neighborhood. And I don't just mean the ghetto, any neighborhood, as we're discovering in this election. If you don't care about the common good, you can't get to the neighborhood. You'll just pontificate and suggest stuff, stereotype people, tell people what they need, come up with programs, drop programs on them, or completely ignore them. What I'm saying to you, it's my love of justice and peace and mercy that first of all gets me, because I can't preach if I haven't tried to understand. Second, moral imagination and the common good suggests that we're all fundamentally human and we want the same thing. We want educations for our brains, food for our stomachs, medicine for our bodies, and hope for our hearts. All of us want the same thing. We want I want my children to do better than I did. I want my children to use me as a springboard to leap and go further and higher and deeper than I ever went. We all want the same thing. Life is not a zero-sum game where some have and some don't have. I want to affirm a vision of the common good where all can have opportunity. I still dare to believe that love and understanding and compassion can overcome hate and violence and mistrust. Nonviolence can overcome violence because we all want the same thing. We all want education for our brain, medicine for our bodies, food for our stomachs, hope for our hearts. We want a future for our children. We all want the same. I don't care what neighborhood you live in. I don't care the color of your skin, whether you're gay, straight, transgender. All of us want the same thing. Do we have a vision? Or is it that the ritual of benefit of America is just for a few, and so we have a zero-sum sense of life, and so we got to compete and we got to get, because if you get, then I won't get, and we won't have, so we got to get and we got to compete? In my preaching, I want to have the courage to go to the neighborhood first. You know, that's why I read Jay-Z's. Some of the language is a little much for me. It offends my middle-class sensibilities. Selling drugs is not a moral choice that I can necessarily support. But he puts me in a young kid's head. And when I read it, I understand. And once I understand, I can dialogue. And once I can dialogue, I can grow. And then I can speak after I've listened. Then secondly, when I preach, I fundamentally believe that it's consistent with the gospel that God has placed enough resources here for everybody. And it's our human misapplication of the resources. So it is fundamental to me that everybody wants food on their stomachs, medicine for their bodies, education for their brains. And everybody wants their children to do better than they've done. Thirdly, because I believe and have the moral imagination, or try to have, even in the difficulty of these elections. It's been tough. That we offer phrases, songs, hymns, poems, lectures, prayers, scriptures, plays, spoken word, poetry that lift and call people to the common good. And so we must be creative. See, what I'm arguing is that it's one thing to understand, comprehend that people are different and to love, but to have the moral imagination to believe it, then the creativity of moral imagination to express it in ways that elevates. Art and poetry elevates, that people, no matter how poor, how uneducated, how rich, or how degreed they are, there is no person that cannot be addressed in the noblest terms of the human heart. Poetry. Or speaking to our better angels. We have so much speaking to the lower parts of ourselves that we're called to speak. I hope this afternoon to talk to you about Robert F. Kennedy, the night that Martin Luther King was assassinated. He stands in a black neighborhood in Indianapolis, Indiana, announces to the crowd that King has been assassinated, and ends up quoting Aeschylus. He says, even in our sleep, pain which cannot forget falls drop by drop upon the heart, until in our despair against our will comes wisdom through the awful grace of God. He's quoting Aeschylus to black people in the ghetto. Now, I don't want to judge anybody, but I almost am certain that a lot of these people never heard Aeschylus. He quotes it. And it speaks wisdom. So we can't have flat and dull and boring sermons. We can have the truth. But if our sermons are flat and dull and boring, not enough imagination and creativity to lift the human heart, so how do we speak to the noblest and the best in the human spirit? Well, this is number 4, and I think I'm pretty well close to being down. A moral imagination to offer the wisdom of the ages. I mean old wisdom and truth. There is truth that has been true for generation and ages, ages upon ages. This is some of what it means when God is called the Ancient of Days, that we assume that days means the accumulation of wisdom. God is the Ancient of Days, wisdom for the ages, truth for the ages. I don't mean when I say old. I got this phrase. I was doing this lecture. I don't know if you ever heard any of the preaching of Gardner Calvin Taylor, but I was doing a lecture on the preaching of Gardner Calvin Taylor, and they asked me to define his homiletics. So I wrote this big lecture. Matter of fact, it's in the book. The red one, the intro to the practice of African-American preaching. Matter of fact, the Jay-Z stuff is in the intro, so if you missed it, get the book, all right? It's in there. Right? I did this lecture, and when I got through, I said, there's something yet that's indefinable in Gardner Calvin Taylor's preaching, and all I can say is it's old. I don't mean old as dusty, outdated. I mean that inside of us, since the dawning of the first Adamah, the first human one, that have been longings, deep longings for truth and beauty and love and justice. Somewhere expressed in the concept of the fall in the Hebrew Bible is the frustration of those longings, and they persist on every continent and every person for every human age. The Bible is a human record of God's concern to speak to and resolve the deepest longings in the human heart. As a Christian, I believe the gospel of Jesus Christ is the fulfillment of the deepest longing. It's the wisdom of the ages. And whenever a preacher speaks to those deeper longings, he or she is channeling old. One person, I said that, they said, is that what you mean when the Bible says deep calls unto deep? Too many sermons are too shallow. They're too shallow. They're too cheap. They don't touch the deep wisdom of the ages that people are hungering for and longing for and thirsting for. We live in the sound bite. I remember we had a marketing person. They wanted to market one of my sermon series to the community, and they were trying to market it. And they said, Ken, well, you got to get that down into a sound bite. We can't market all that depth. How do we get that down? Well, some things can't be gotten down into a sound bite. Some things require depth and require time and require meditation and require just intense thought about as to its deepest meaning. But we live in a soundbite culture. Headline truth. It's when we go deep that we come up with the wisdom of the ages, the wisdom. I come from a tradition that channeled wisdom of the ages. In the deepest and the most desperate circumstances and situations, the tradition that I came from would say, I still believe that God will not be mocked. You will reap what you sow. I come from a tradition that literally took it that truth crushed to the earth will rise again. Truth forever on the scaffold, wrong forever on the throne. But in the shadow, the dim shadow, stands God keeping watch over God's own. I come from a tradition that knows that weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. I come from a tradition that literally believes that the lion will lay down with the lamb and they shall beat their swords in the plowshares and we will study war no more. We believe in the best of the African American preaching tradition, that love is deeper than hate, that justice is deeper than injustice, that hate will be overcome. The wisdom. We believe that pride and arrogance goes before the fall. It's the wisdom of the ages that I find in the scriptures, and I'm disappointed so many times, even in my own preaching, but especially sometimes when I hear some of the cute, the cliche, the surface, the superficial, the non-addressing of the issues, the side skirts, the cotton candy, the superfluous. No real depth, no real challenge, no real call, just affirming country club religion. Your miracle is around the corner. Lay your hands on the radio. I believe that we need chaplains for the common good. Preachers who have the moral imagination, who will go to the neighborhood. What are the 4 things I said and I'm out? What were they? Y'all remember? Go to the neighborhood. You gotta go to, and what? Number 2 was what? There's enough. Thank you. What was number 3? Meet. It's us. And number 4, number 3, what was that? Wasn't meet the parents. Let me look on the manuscript. Wait a minute, let me go to the manuscript. It was good. That was a good response, right? That we must speak to the noblest and the best in the human spirit. That was number 3. And of course, number 4, with the wisdom of the ages. Why are we so shallow? Okay, thank you so much. Let me stop there, and I guess I'll see you later.